N. Venkatraman, but we will continue to trouble you, sir, in the near future. We request you to support all our endeavors. Thank you very much, sir. With this introductory remarks, I request Sri N. Venkatraman to deliver a speech on constitutional implications in the recent budget proposals. Thank you, sir.
Touched by your gesture of your very presence here, sir. I'll try my best to vindicate your hopes on me today. It's very nice. It's not a question of waiting or a question of making RBA wait. When the first call came, even before they could invite me, I trusted myself with an invitation to speak to you. Simple reason, the lineage and the people who have held positions and the persons who have delivered lectures in RBA is something very unique, something very exceptional. And Sridhar and Devnath sir was kind enough to include in this galaxy an ordinary person also. And they called me to say you should also come. So I thought let me tag myself so that I can say that I also spoke in RBA sometime to some people. It is such a valuable opportunity. I say it with a lot of sense of gratitude and a sense of responsibility. It's a big gratitude and it's a huge opportunity to talk to RBA. Why? I thought we will share the session in the following parts so that it's convenient. We put it into different buckets. Yeah, we'll do something on the constitutional challenge. There are 2-3 areas which look very minor at this point of time. I think I'm audible. Am I? Yeah. There are about 2-3 areas where we can think about constitutional challenge. In fact, when we entered, Jagdishan sir was asking about some fact, and he said, I think you need a search and seizure to find out the truth. I told him, no more reasons needs to be disclosed post this budget. There's no need. So what happens to 70 years of legislation, 70 years of court judgments? Have they all been replaced with one sweep of a sentence saying that there are 2 major amendments there. Now anybody can initiate inquiry. The law is heading towards that. Any officer virtually if you see the list, can initiate an inquiry and he need not take the consent of his superior. That has been dispensed with and he need not disclose reasons. And even if he wants to summon the books from a particular office, he can summon the books without ascribing any reasons. So, investigation and inquiry can be done with anybody. No nodal approval is required and you don't have to disclose reasons. Now, what will be the impact of these 3 put together as a cluster? That's the question. If you examine, whenever actions look penal, whenever a conduct is perceived to be with criminal intention, there are statutory provisions under tax enactments, whether we call it indirect tax or indirect tax, where the law will presume guilt against you. The law will presume proof against you. The law will presume burden against you. It's possible. It's not impossible. Take the case of 125 the Customs Act. If you are, the moment they hold you for gold, the presumption is it's a smuggling book. Till such time, the presumption is disproved. Take the case of dowry death. Take the case of this domestic violence under 498A, till it was recently amended. A spate of Supreme Court judgments came to save men folk, to say that domestic violence no longer is confined only to women. When women do it against men. So the provisions are now getting amended, consciously amended. So gender bias is now extended also to men through a spate of Supreme Court judgments. So all these provisions presume a particular activity, a particular fact, a particular evidence, a particular proof against the person who is under or subject to inquiry. So, it is situational specific, case specific, transaction specific. You can draft a law, no problem. But you can't paint all the tax assessees in this country with one brush and say, all of you are criminals. Here are. Whenever I open an inquiry under 132, 1A, all of you are criminals. I'll presume all of you are criminals. Well, that may look far-reaching at the moment. It's all you do a tentative study because ideas mature only over a period of time. 70 years of judicial history is overturned, and you can't find answers in 7 days or in 7 minutes. But if you pitch the core, touch the core center, when it is not transaction specific and when it is not case specific or situation specific, can you presume that merely because a discretion is vested with an officer to initiate an inquiry, he uses the discretion and then says, I have used my discretion, I am not accountable to anybody. It says, if you see the provision, no assessee and no court of law up to tribunal. We are not entitled to give you the reasons why we are launching an inquiry against you. Does it interfere with your fundamental right? In fact, 10 days back, I had the good opportunity to talk in the National Judicial Academy in Bhopal. I did 3 sessions for High Court judges. One of the sessions was in public interest litigation. Interesting, a subject which I had never worked so far. So I spent some time to read that law. It's very interesting. I'm referring this to bring the connectivity to what we are discussing right now. Actually, Part 3 is an enforceable right under the Constitution. Any violation of a Part 3 right, equality, right to carry on trade, right to carry on profession, right to life, these are all fundamental rights which can be enforced in a court action if the executive doesn't do it. But Part 4, which is Directive Principles of State Policy, Article 37, very clearly utters a caution. They are not court enforceable rights. They are duties to be performed by the governments. Government has to, as a egalitarian, to achieve the dream of an egalitarian society, government has to do all this, it says. Now, interestingly, if you see every day in the court some public interest litigation is filed. This tank is under repair, this water body is not working. For any executive malfunctioning inaction, a public interest litigation is filed and court starts enforcing it. So, what I did, when I read it, I found out the contradiction. Apparently, you can't do that under, there's a constitutional bar under Article 37. But every day court is giving judgments saying, and court monitors whether this water body is working, whether this has been cleaned by 10 people, whether wages have been paid to him. All this is happening through court judgments. Now, how did this happen? You have 2 contradictory things happening. Constitution bars court action, court gives action. What has happened? If you see, if you go into the central core of it, all of them found out a way to bring all these actionable rights under Article 21 as right of life. Right to life, breathing, environment. What kind of, see, imagine, suddenly you file a writ petition saying Madras is very dirty, very polluted, all of us should breathe clean air. Which government can do anything to it? It's a coalition in which, so in winter, so many people are shelterless, everybody should be, so all this happens under the bucket called a right to live. So duties migrated into rights, and you start pursuing it under Article 21. This is how public interest litigation has grown in this country. Now the point which I'm trying to drive, can you now say you have a right to carry on your trade or a profession or a business under Article 19(1)(g)? Every tax assessee ultimately has a fundamental right to do what he wants, as long as it is within the permissible limits of law. So somebody does a business as his fundamental right, and he produces accounts, he pays taxes, an officer discredits it or disbelieves it. That discretion is vested with that officer without a doubt. As an inquiry officer, he is entitled to admit your evidence, he is entitled to peruse your evidence, he is entitled to comment, he is entitled to reject, he is entitled to suspect. All these are right. We have no problem about it. But there is one principle of law. Executive action, executive discretion is always amenable to judicial review. That's exactly the otherwise, why should all these people's, why should we stand every day to say violation of natural justice and start questioning the assessment orders? So, executive action is subject and amenable to judicial review. That's fundamental. Judicial review is part of the basic structure of our constitution. Now, a provision comes far-reaching and far-sweeping to say, the moment the officer decides to act, decides to use his discretion to inquire, he need not divulge you the reasons why he is doing it against you. See, the content is correct. So, will it not, one of the tests under the constitution, one of the tests under the various statutory provisions of law, you need to have checks and balances, not through a court action every time. You must have the inbuilt checks and balances within the law. Court can't be a guardian for every enactment. It can't be reading every provision whether there is a checks and balance. Every enactment must have its own inbuilt checks and balances. That's the requirement of law. So what was the checks and balances which we had for 70 years, 60 years? The checks and balances were, A, you have to do it not arbitrarily. How do you ensure that whatever you do, you take an approval from the senior? How does it happen? I will explain. You all know, and there's no need to explain. That's a different story. But an enactment is there. The process is conceived in the enactment. It very clearly says you have to be careful. When you pick and choose, you need to pick and choose with a rational basis. And your conduct and action needs to be validated by a superior. That's the first stage. Now that is dispensed. So you have an unfettered right. That's the first concern. But the second concern, in spite of the officer superior giving you the mandate to go ahead, when you do something against somebody which can affect his rights, is he not entitled to reasons? Is he not entitled to go in that path? In fact, we are all thinking natural justice. Every day we find repetitions and we accept across court. Natural justice is a huge doctrine, and the evolution is something very, very inspiring if you see. In fact, Justice Ravindra Bhatt, when he spoke that day in that seminar, he referred to classic judgments from English courts and the US Supreme Court for 300 years. This doctrine, how it has matured today for us to stand up in 1 minute to say there's a violation of natural justice. It's something which has culminated over 300 years of research. Now, what happens in natural justice? What are the ingredients of natural justice? It is not simply an opportunity or a right to hear. That is one limb of natural justice. If you read Shukla Brothers' judgment, where they have referred to a lot of English cases, including the statement of Lord Denning, a very famous statement of Lord Denning, who says, natural justice is not simply hearing, it is also giving reasons. An order without reasons is also an order in violation of natural justice. It's not, I hear you, okay, natural justice, come right now, sit before me, I see you, I say goodbye to you, and then I don't give any reasons, I issue an order. He can't say he has complied with natural justice. He has to give you the reasons in the order. And famous statement of Lord Elling is, why do you give reasons? It says, reasons are the live links. Reason is the live link between the decision maker, and connecting them the decision making process. You get all the three. A decision maker, the process he resorts to, and where it culminates. All the three put together becomes reasons, especially when such an order is capable of being tested in an appellate forum. That's the test. The only court today in the country which need not give reasons is the Supreme Court, because there is no further appeal against it. Every other court in this country has to give reasons whenever it passes an order. Now the point is, all right, this natural justice we understand, this is reasons at the time of passing the order. Now the statute originally said, even before initiating action, which is almost in the nature of quasi-criminal, you should be put on reasons. You should disclose the reasons why you are suspecting him. It is an elementary principle of natural justice. You don't have to escalate it to a constitutional principle. Elementary. Now that is taken away, twist has to be. So, how far-reaching it's going to be? We'll have to wait and see how. Now, of course, once there are spate of actions, then it will calibrate. Heat, light, sound, noise, everything will come out of it. Dust, purity, impurity, everything will emanate, and then of course the right case should go to the court for the court to perceive and understand. If you go to a wrong case and then pitch, the provision will be declared intravenous at the time of admission itself. So we need to wait for the right case to put across this. Yeah, everything. It includes that also. You can even have a wrong point, but you must have a right counsel. That's true. True. So this is one subject I thought I should touch upon. Then I trace back a year, equalization levy is something very, very interesting, because it's on international taxation. I thought there are a few young children here. I will want to speak a few minutes. I took consent from Sridhar. Let us not confine it only to some constitutional topic. Let's talk about what is happening in the international taxation scenario, in the transfer pricing scenario. Some interesting developments are happening in the financial sector. Whatever India was doing, Indian tax department is doing, now world is replicating our model. Australia is today as aggressive as India is in trying to because Indian MNCs are sitting there. So when we start treating foreign embassies in India in a very with a nice glove, now we are meted out with the same treatment in other taxing jurisdictions. All this is happening now. I thought I'll at least put it across to you as to what is progressing across the world. A few minutes. Whenever you have to stop, you have to tell me, I'll stop. Till such time you go on. So now the second interesting aspect is this equalization levy. See, what do you mean by equalization? You buy a cell phone, say from a bazaar shop. He gives you an invoice. He collects you 10,000 rupees. You walk away. He files a return. All his expenditure over. He makes 400 rupees per piece. So 400 rupees is his income. He offers it to tax. You want a specific service provider to come from Norway. He is a specialist. So you fly him down. He sits here for 6 months, works out all your requirements, renders you a service, charges for it, source of income in India, taxed. No problem. Now, because of the advent of technology, brick and mortar business is slowly dying. All of us are emerging towards e-commerce transactions. All of us know. Now your grandchildren, our children, every 15 minutes or at least once in a day, you take your telephone, you will be up for a shop. They would have, without your knowledge, swipe your card and with an add-on, purchase something else, and you will Before you figure, the next message comes. So it saps on you. So all this is done. You don't go to the shop at all. You go to the internet and place an order and then buy it, trade electronically. This happens in cross-border transactions. Huge businesses now happen without PE and without a business presence. So what happened? All over the world, this is a problem. You can locate your satellite in some unknown country, not found in the geography map, and start servicing across the world. So you don't pay tax at all in any other countries. It's happening. So G20 raised this in a very big way. They said this is going to put us all into catastrophe. We need to do something on this electronic transaction. So they suggested in that meeting, you can go for an equalization levy. What do you mean by an equalization levy? It is something very close to BEPS. That is, it's action plan 1 of BEPS says this. What do you mean by that? They said, it's not necessary where you are physically located. As long as the income earning source and you are able to be traced to a particular origin or location, then that location can charge this equalization. That's how BEPS plan very clearly speak about it. So somebody renders a service in India using the electronic mode and takes money out of India. His source of earning is traceable to India, even though he sits in the Middle East. So BEPS plans say, which is called the basic erosion of profits. Base erosion of profits. So this is a profit and income, the source of which is traceable to India. Notwithstanding the fact it doesn't have a PE, notwithstanding the fact it doesn't have a business presence. So allow India to charge a transaction. That's exactly what it says. Now, interesting point is, therefore, government is free to do it. It can do it. But the restriction is, today treaties don't permit you to do it. That's the problem. Treaties put a bar for transaction. So G20 suggested, we can't be going and correcting every treaty. Let's go to a multilateral instrument. Let all, it happens. See, there is a difference between a treaty and a multilateral instrument. I think all of you will be aware. A treaty is normally between two countries. You agree on certain terms and preferences. Whereas a multilateral agreement is something which is common. For example, money laundering law. It all came in India in 2002. Why? 94 countries signed a multilateral agreement. One of the reasons which militates against checks and without unchecked black money into various countries is absence of a money laundering law. Therefore, all of us should get into a money laundering law. So identical provisions are copied. So 100 countries sign, then it becomes a multilateral instrument at the same time. So G20 suggested, go to your MI, then permit transaction. That has not happened yet. So now, what did India do? It wanted to tax especially advertisement income and the portal income. That was the main two sources which happens. All your advertisement revenue, you show it is beamed in India, but the satellite will be in Hong Kong or in some other place. So, and the viewership, the footprints will only be in India, because it will be, sometimes it will be in Hindi, in Marathi, local languages. You can't say a beneficiary is in Dubai. You can't even treat such a case. So directly proximate to country. So they wanted to put this transaction in. Now the point is, you can do it only when you break the treaty. You can do it only when you enter into your MI. Now what they do, they say this is not income tax. See the way they achieve it. They immediately say, no, this is not income tax. This is transaction levy. And how do they sustain it? They bring it to the Finance Act. Don't promote it into the income tax. It's not integrated. The challenge is there. Then the question is, if it is not Income Tax Act, what else is this? Is it a service fee you are taxing? Alright, what is happening? He does it, so money comes into India, he takes money out of India, there is a service revenue going to him, no doubt about it. When $1,000 is paid to an advertisement company, say in Hong Kong, service tax law says on reverse charge, the service recipient has to pay service tax. He's already paying 16%. So you can't give him the character that it's a service. You can only give it a character as income. See, there is a principle called aspect doctrine, which is a Canadian principle, which our courts have applied it more so in tax enactments. What do you mean by this aspect doctrine? Very simple. Let's take this podium or this mic. The parts of this mic, say, gets imported from Dubai. Then all its import into the country, you pay customs duty. No problem. Then you assemble all the parts of the mic and make it into a mic. Because you do an activity of manufacture, you are supposed to pay an excise duty on the value of the mic. Then I sell this mic to Sridhar. Say this mic is say 10,000 rupees. When I cut the invoice to Sridhar, the law says 10,000 rupees will be the invoice base on which you will pay excise duty because you have manufactured it, and you will pay sales tax because you are selling it to Sridhar. You can't say double levy, double jeopardy, Article 22, nothing will go for. As long as there are fields to tax and as long as there are aspects to tax, you are entitled to put the tax. Take your own case of chartered accountants. Are you not paying income tax? And are you not paying service tax? Are you not paying professional tax? Why 3 taxes? There are 3 different aspects. Professional tax is because you hold a professional qualification. Income tax because you earn an income. Service tax is because you earn the income by rendition of a service. Service includes disservice also under the judgments. So, except in the case of lawyers, because lawyers are, we don't render anything. So, it's reverse charge. Always. Unlike chartered accounts, so you are all deemed to be rendering service, which benefit is not even extended to lawyers. So, the point is, same income gets captured to tax multiple times, you have aspects. So there is nothing wrong in calling this transaction levy as income and also as service. Why? The money earned is income and the money is earned through service. So there is nothing wrong in paying service tax. No problem at all. You can sustain it. But you put a banner saying, no, this is not income tax. That comes the problem. Then what else is this? Can you say under entry 97 it is some other levy when the character is that of an income tax? Either it has to be a service charge, service tax, or an income tax. You can't find a third species. There's no space. You have a constitutional power under entry 97, I don't deny. But you must identify that aspect. What is that aspect? So, to that extent, this levy looks to be not appropriate. The reason it suffers the handicap of a qualification as an income because your treaties bar you from imposing transaction.
Any challenge already pending?
Challenge is under consideration. As you read, but it's worth it. Something worth doing it. So now this is one interesting development. Now the third constitutional aspect, I thought there are 2 important amendments in this budget relating to black money. Presumption is that it will mitigate or reduce the enforcement of black money into the country, and already banner is raised and revolt is happening. It looks that one of the provisions may not come also. That looks to be the indication at this moment. But there are 2 important. One is 1038, an amendment to section 1038, and the second is this explanation 5 to section 9 now being watered down. This is a very interesting capture I have to tell you. How we say world is a circle Wherever you start, you will come back to the same origin. That this amendment is one such impact. Now let's take 1038 first. See, what are they attempting through 1038? The suggestion is twofold qualifications. Any scrip transacted post October 2004, which has not suffered security transaction tax, will not be entitled to exemption. And it shall be indicated, the persons and entities shall be indicated through a notification. It will be notified. It's not blanket. So they're going to get to notify. So pick and choose. Negotiations will happen. I can be there, I need not be there. Now, why this amendment? That's it. See, if you read the black money story in India, it's very interesting, it's very unique in India. India doesn't follow the international pattern. We have our own patent on black money. See, whenever there is a large consumer base to anything, because India and China has the advantage of population. When world over they thought population is a disadvantage. Now people understand population is an advantage. India and China has that simple. Instead of selling it in 25 European countries with the 25 different laws, you have only one market called India. You can sell it here. Diabetes, 60, 50, minus 10. You can push drugs. Easy to sell. Otherwise, you have to go to 25 countries in Europe to make your market. So, population is a huge advantage, huge disadvantage. Now, whenever there is a large consumer base on any commercial activity, the middleman involved in the large commercial base will peddle money. That's the logic of black money. They will launder wealth. They will launder money. Simple. Sports. If all of us sitting in a stadium, in a cricket stadium, I make this statement. If all of us in the country decide we will not watch sports channels for 1 year, please disconnect our, you take our connections out on sports channel. I don't know how many will get heart attack, that's a different story. If you do that for 1 year, there will be no laundering in sports. Liquor, real estate. If you read the blueprint of this demonetization, how it started initially because of real estate and how it boomeranged into a big thing. It's a very interesting process on demonetization. It's a very interesting study, how it happened. So, wherever there is a large consumer base, middlemen peddle money. That's how black money works in India. Conceptually. We are not talking of cinema tickets. Somebody was saying, yesterday's Pondicherry, today's Mauritius or Cyprus. Very right, very right. It's the easiest way of accounting black into white. What they will do, you put a useless cinema where even 10 fellows don't buy tickets. You keep on carrying the tickets for 500 viewership every show, then you bring back money into white money. This has all happened 40 years back. And you now globalize it with the technology, with huge dimensions, it becomes huge black money. Principles are same everywhere. Now, what happens? What happens? What happens in share transactions? Right. See, what happens in shares? Unlisted companies can also trade shares. So you create a company, you have enough black money with you, float a company, put the share at 10 rupees at par. Even your wife will not subscribe. You will have some subscription. Then you start trading. Push your black money, it's like a balloon. 10 becomes 20, 20 becomes 50, 50 becomes 100, 100 becomes 1000. Then like Facebook, the more number of viewership, then it hits the radar. You are watched like a blog. So a useless, not even worth holding the tooth powder, is now gaining visibility at 1,000 rupees. Useless share, no credentials. Once it hits the radar, then our consumer, gullible consumers, they will all think everyday money should multiply. There are people. So they will start chasing this share. So this man's effort is simple. 10 to 1,000 he will push it because he has the money to fund it. After that it pushes on its own. Then it goes to 2,000. It goes to 3,000. Our guys will start, oh my God, this is pushing here. This is going to make 1 lakh. Once it's like a washing machine. Once the guy converts all his, it's all family owned funds. Simple. Once he washes all his black into white, his job is over. He is not interested to serve you. He is not going to give you returns or dividend. He will simply walk out one day. And the share from 3,000 rupees comes down to 10 rupees. And the guys who are the public gullible investors who have put the money will feel the heat thereafter. So this is a recorded instance. Hundreds and thousands of such instances are recorded in the history of share market. Because whenever they see, that was one, but when we talked about either demonetization or bringing the bad money law, one sensitive sector was share market. It's an unbelievably huge market. Unbelievably huge market. So this law now says, if you try to do any of these things, you normally avoid an STT. If you have avoided an STT, you will not get the benefit under that. Simple. Perfectly right. You can't be paying fraud on everybody. At least pay your taxes. You have paid fraud on your consumers. Now at least pay the taxes. That looks to be the moral. But there is already news in circulation. Either two things can happen. This provision may not come at all. Even if it comes, after all, the discretion is to notify the persons. So the privilege will never get notified. So it will be a provision which is toothless if it comes in that form. But the real intention is to plug black money transactions in the share market. That looks to be the idea. Right. Then the second amendment is 9.5. Explanation 5 to section 9. This is again, Vodafone in our judicial history is one of the boldest judgments in our judicial history. People will talk, we will give multiple views about Vodafone judgment. Historically, India would have collapsed if 3 socialist judges sat and heard it. Indian investment would have simply, would have wound up like a circus tent, but for this judgment. So what happened? What happened there is interesting. See, a Mauritius holding company invests 10,000 crores in India. And in 10 years' time, the value of the share is now has progressed to 50,000 crores. 10,000 crores multiplied 5 times. So the investor decided to quit the Indian market. He will go to now Siberia and invest the same thing. So when he sold the shares, this was not under the Mauritius route. The parent to parent was Mauritius. It was a Cayman Island transaction. Cayman Island did not have a treaty benefit. If the same transaction has been done through Mauritius, no problem. But because he did it through Cayman Island, it was not governed by treaty. Therefore, Indian tax office said we tax you 50,000, tax on pay withholding on 50,000 crores, on 40,000 crores. This is the simple case. When the proposal went to the then FM and to the finance ministry, they said you proceed legally. And the case finally reached the Supreme Court. So Supreme Court had a choice. It could have said, yes, Cayman Island is not governed by treaty, so we can't extend you the benefit which we have extended you to Mauritius. Please pay tax on 40,000 crores. in which case 124 such major investments were waiting in the queue to be axed. In which case, India would not be receiving one more trickle dollar into the country. The idea, see, this is legalized black money. What is the advantage? 40,000 rupees. You don't inflict a capital gains tax of 10%. You save 4,000 rupees. So the investor goes home with extra 4,000, and therefore India could be a preferred destination for investment. Simple. He chooses India because he can make profit, which profit will not be taxed. That's why he is investing in India. So they had two options. No, you should pay tax. Then the economic scenario would have undergone a toss. The judges handled the situation very bravely, very, very assiduously, and delivered a twin principle judgment. It said, it classified black money into two, officially the judgment. Black money which invested in India creates wealth. Black money which goes for wrong purposes, women trafficking, drugs, terrorism, crime, laundering, etc., etc. It classified it into two. And it said, somebody brings an investment and he shows he has multiplied the investment in terms of employment, in terms of salaries, in terms of income tax, in terms of tax payments. He has shown this is what, then shut your eyes to the source. Rishigolam, Najigolam, Market. The judgment very clearly says, para 67 or 69, for example. It says, on the contrary, if black money goes to bad causes, select those heads and hunt those heads, shoot them down, no problem. So your action is limited only towards that. Now, see, then we did not have a majority government at that point of time. Then somebody else came with a slender majority. Now what did they push an amendment? They immediately got over the judgment. All the efforts of the judges, understanding the economic equilibrium, classified all this and blessed these investments because they are profit generating. See, all over the world, economic progress has happened only through the mixture of good and bad. Economic success cannot happen only through pure. It's like even like gold. You want a jewelry, you need a little bit of copper in gold. That's nature. Problem is, it should not be more of copper and less of gold. Then it is not gold jewelry, it is some other jewelry. So this texture is it is scientific, it is academic, it is spiritualistic. You put it in any form, it answers it that way. World has progressed that way, and you are part of the progress. And the judgment understood this underlying principle, and that's how it delivered this ratio. It was very clear and candid. Imagine a Supreme Court doing it. That was the need of the hour. It understood the need. Because the judge who wrote the judgment understood, had a strong economic background, and he was far superior to many of the chartered accountants in the country. He's extremely informed. Retired Chief Justice was no more. Justice Kapadia was the leading author of the judgment.
One more instance of Supreme Court delivering a judgment, because need of the hour, they have dealt with us.
Correct. Very true. Very true. Somebody had been alive, the judgment could have been different, or judgment would not have come. Quite possible. Quite possible. We don't deny it. Yeah.
Only scam is also good for economic.
No. That's what I'm saying. I will not use the word scam or any such thing. Idea is, bad money generating wealth is a permissible exercise all over the world. Bad money going for terrorists and drug funding has to be shot. Now, what did they do? They amended the law saying they upset Vodafone, saying that as long as the investment of the shares held outside the country, the underlying assets are located in India, then it is liable for capital gains. So the effort of the judges to retain the investment base morally got defeated through this amendment. They brought it in 2012, of course, with retrospective amendment, 18th century, 16th century, even before human race was created. All right. Now you suffer the heat for 5 years. You see the investment now. See, there are two dissuading factors today, because we are all lawyers and professionals here, not accountants. There are two dissuading factors which were anti-investment measures. One is this provision. Another is the knee jerk, just to prove to the world that we have done something. The knee jerk, it's not that I'm this government and that government. I'm a true professional, and I have my own preferences in what they are doing good. So I'm not taking a stand politically. The insertion of this black money law is a huge lever in the hands of the tax administration. Now, why I say this? After all, Supreme Court has classified it into two: bad money going for good and bad money going for bad. Bad money for going for bad can never be brought under tax debt. They're all people above law. So how do you use this black money law? Who will you chase? The law says, see, government brought a P note. What does the P note say? You don't have to disclose anything. It's an official document of the government. Source need not be disclosed. That's the concept of P note. Now, black money law says the man who has received it, the officer has got a right to go and inquire. So the man, electronic funding, I'm going to talk about electronic funding also in digital in 5 minutes. So the man who receives it, who will receive it? A P note is received by an investment company investing in India. He can be hanged through this black money law. Not the guy who generated the black money in Mauritius and gives it to you in the form of a P note. He is kept scot-free. Aimless. So now, realizing this 5 years of downfall in investment, they have now made a clarificatory amendment in this budget saying that this Damocles sword of explanation fine will not apply for those investments through FI.
So you're fine. What is it?
FI.
Category 1 and 2.
Category 1 and 2.
Things will that the others will submit.
Inverted comma 3, and he's right. Inverted comma 3 still is the scanner.
They should-
One category 1 and 2. So this is the origin, and now where are we? See, of course, in democracy it's possible. You can always flip-flop. You started first initiating Vodafone case 10 years back. When you have understood the economic priority, you should not have initiated. Then you got a judgment, very unique of its kind, by a Supreme Court which classified black money into two. Then you upset it. Find you are doing a mistake. Now you reverse it in 2017. Take it back to square one and say, bad money for good purposes, we will shut our eyes.
Venture capital still remains. Maybe.
No, but essentially, see, I think the Indian economy still the strength lies in FFI. FII's investment. That looks to be a major chunk, because good investments with surviving investment has an FII origin. Most often is one presumption which is made to allow this amendment to be carried out. If there is a need for venture capital, they will do it tomorrow also. We don't know. See, it's a question of releasing the balloon slowly. They can do that also. If there's a legitimate case, if they find investment still falling short, they may do it also. It's a question of an economic need, as simple as that. So this is how this is in these two amendments relate to this black money law. We come to transfer pricing. Again, two important amendments. Secondary adjustments. It's a very tell me exactly how much more time you can. Right. So secondary adjustment is a very important scenario. I have to tell you what you mean by secondary adjustment. Of course, the law gives one protection to the assessee, which also I will read. What do you mean by secondary adjustment? Suppose you return saying your P&M profit is say 2%. The officer says it is 7.5%. And therefore resulting in an adjustment of say 100 crores. You have done service to your parent company in US. You have received say 20 crores. Now the officer says it can't be 20 crores, it has to be 100 crores. Then you finally lose the matter in the court. It says statutory liability. It uses the word statutory liability. Not progressive liability. Then it's taken. Then it becomes 100 crores. Now secondly, it is an OECD compulsion. That's exactly what the provisions of the bill also say. All over the world, a crystallized statutory liability in a particular taxing jurisdiction necessitates actually calling the money of difference 80 crores into India. So earlier, before this amendment, you can have 100 crores adjustment, pay the taxes on it, be done with it. Money can still be in US. Money need not come. So what is the use? You only collected the tax. You did not collect the resource. Now this amendment now says, once such an order is passed, the money should come back to India.
If I agree.
Yeah, if I agree, statutory liability. It should be a crystallized statutory liability.
If you want to appeal, it will not appeal.
I'll come to that. It won't. It won't. That's the only saving line. Otherwise, I'm going to give you two situations. What sort of an order was getting passed, and if you do secondary adjustment of this first stage of TPO, you'll all shut shop, and then all of us will be progressing, but not the businesses. so 80 crores, if it doesn't come into India, this law says, the amendment, 80 crores will be treated as an advance. And you will be asked to withhold TDS on interest. So the meter will start running on 80 crores. That is how the law is. The silver line in the whole case is, fortunately, this law says it's an accepted liability, not based on a TPO assessment order. I'll give you two instances which very recently we have filed some petitions in Karnataka High Court and Madras High Court. In Karnataka High Court, you have a specified domestic transaction sedan in the last 3-4 years. So two sister concerns, both operating in India and then transferring income from one to other. The assessee files a 3CB report, part 1 for international transaction, part 2 for domestic transaction. He files a 3CB report, no problem, audited. The officer issued the old notice, standard cyclostate notice in May. That old notice had only the requirement to furnish records on international transaction. And our guys went and gave those details. 6 months hearing is going on, 8 hearings, 10 hearings, reply, more volumes, more pillows, everything has been dumped in his office. 4 days before the assessment order, he realized major chunk of 400 crores transaction is domestic transaction. International transaction is only 27 crores. And all these pillows are only related to 27 crores. He raised 400 crores. Only 4 days remained. Smart officer. He immediately passed an assessment order. We have not updated our system. We can't be blamed for that. You are all educated assessees. When law has been amended, when 3CB reports have been filed for both, you ought to have produced all the records also for domestic transaction. You have failed to produce, I will adjust 400 crores. How? He says, I am passing best judgment. And how best judgment? I have the capacity to judge, therefore I will judge. So we filed writ petitions on 3 grounds. We told the court, and that judge is a chartered accountant judge, he's from Rajasthan. This is very good. Absolutely, you can't imagine a judge like, he will immediately put all the debit credit card, it runs into his blood. Such a dynamic judge. In less than 20 seconds, he understood all the 3 points. The first point he raised to us. But I said, we can be an assessee, but we can't be an astrologer. We can't be imagining what he is going to ask or what. He says, I should have come and showed him this. I don't understand. That is the requirement. What? Two, best judgment is possible in income tax, corporate taxation. In transfer pricing, there is no room for best judgment. If I don't give records, then he has to find his own evidence, he has to find his own comparables and make the adjustment. He can't make some best judgment assessment on his own part. Second point. And interestingly, the third point is, both are revenue neutral entities and there is no tax implication because both are paying taxes. They are not tax holiday entities. That is the use of this transfer pricing law. Fortunately, that is the second amendment in transfer pricing in 40. Now they have said, this is something which I have been asking from day one. When both entities are taxable entities and they are offering it into holding and offering it into, why do you do what? What is the domestic transaction you will do? What sort of a report you will prepare? So now they have amended the law to say that unless you enjoy tax holiday or a benefit, then you are revenue neutral, then you are out of this. Of course, it's loss of business for chartered accountants, but please don't worry about it. You will still have inventions from our officers through their assessment orders. You will be still for surprises. So the court admitted the writ petition and granted stay. Similarly, in Chennai, the tribunal writes an order saying that international transaction, you can make an arm's length adjustment only on an international transaction. So suppose you have 100 rupees, your raw material is 100 rupees. 25 rupees is imported, which is international transaction. 75 rupees is domestic. Now, you disclose a profit of 2%, which he makes it 7.5%. All right, he will fight it till the cows return. But now you can't extrapolate this 7.5, you can extrapolate it on 25. You can't do it on 100. That's the law, tribunal judgment. Not reverse, not state. Now TPO follows the tribunal judgment. Something, this happened. And says, I will only escalate the profit from 2% to 7.5%, make 150 crores adjustment. Or go to DRP. DRP issues an enhancement notice saying that I think failed, grave error, grave injustice, revenue is prejudice, all that usual, and says we will now escalate it not on 25 but on 100 rupees. Therefore, we make an adjustment of 700 crores more. 850 crores. Order is passed. So we find a repetition because we are having a judge who's again extremely so balanced. No alternative remedy theory, it won't work with him. So we told him, why alternative remedy? There is a law which binds that officer. As a tribunal judgment, we say this is the law. And see the provisions of law, that's what it means. Tribunal is not erred in law. Now we extrapolate 150 and make it 800. State. Now why I am saying these two instances? 40A, the secondary adjustment. Today it is unaccepted liability. I am not sure. After 2 years, if they say it is not accepted liability, whenever an order is passed, on 800 crores you have to receive money here. And they will say, unless otherwise stayed by court. Suppose they bring an amendment. And 800 crores is not stayed, then 800 crores will be deemed to be an advance. So today the law is fine. But how it progresses is something which we'll have to wait and watch. Last 5 minutes, then I'll find out. Well, I wanted to talk something about why, but we'll do it next time. On this electoral funding, so one of the interesting theories is getting now emerging. See, what do you mean by this electoral bond? The payer has to go to the bank and secure the bond. So his identity will be known to the bank, no problem. But you carry the bond and give it to the political party. The political party need not know the donor. Now earlier, nobody knew who the donor was. Now the regulation is, you have to do it through a bank, and therefore, a very, very responsible person made a statement. When 20,000 became 2,000, he made a statement. What? Earlier it was 1 Binami fellow. Now we'll have to find 10 Binami fellows, that's all. Things will change. Very, very responsible person made this statement in press, in the media. So, you have to now find this electoral bond in this mechanism. So the point is, there's no endorsement, it's actual encashment. So the question is, will it be called a currency? If so, what are its implications? So RBI has been sounded with this point, and therefore RBI is now trying to regulate it by putting, of course, the format has to come that you should encash it within this much period and this much of checks balance. All this they have to ensure that it does not have the color of a currency. That's
Barrel
one.
bond.
Huh?
The barrel bond.
Barrel bond, similar to barrel bond. If as it stands today, it is similar to barrel bond. Unless otherwise you regulate it with some restrictions, it is simply like a barrel bond. And it can add a lot of pressure also in the process. In fact, companies are worried. The first reaction by companies is they always at least pretended to say, no, I have to go to that party also. I'm under pressure, so please take this. Now they will say barrel bond, nobody knows, so don't give to any party, please give everything to me. So this is the immediate fear most of the corporate circles are worried about. They are all opposing this barrel bond. You make it open bond, you better tell who is getting what.
They have disclosed the annual opportunity.
Yeah, but they will disclose, but they don't have to disclose. See, they only say that that's a doubt. Bank knows who the donor is. After that, disclosure levels are conceived at every stage. That looks to be the prima facie appearance. Yeah. If you disclose in your balance sheet, then the whole idea is the political party need not know who the bearer bond, the giver of the bearer bond is. That's the concession the political party enjoys today. So these are the things. Of course, I want to also speak about FTS, about permanent establishment. These are all, and beautiful doctrines are emerging in international taxation between debt, guarantee, indemnity, equity, and quasi-equity. Some other session to see that we'll have it. Beautiful concept in financial sector. Law is emerging all over the globe. Australia, what is doing to our Indian entities? We are now fighting a huge case. Federal court judgment already for an Indian is against. So we are fighting a very big battle in Australia for another client to say federal court is wrong and therefore it has to review its judgment. Some interesting developments all over the world. So once again, I thank Sridhar, each one of you, and I seek your wishes, if you are able to me, and seek the blessings of each one of you. They have all grown through your eyes. Continue to bless us, and will continue to do all best as possible. I also offer my pranams to my senior, Mr. C. Natarajan, but for whom I would be nobody else. So I offer this speech also as a part of my gesture.
First one will always be Devananda.
Right, Pranali. The present position of treaty versus amendments in 1960, transponders,
Yeah.
process.
See, even last week we did give an opinion for an e-commerce company. Now,
What about give the result also?
I'll tell you both. I can now tell very boldly, Verizon is a wrong judgment. Without a doubt, it's a wrong judgment. Complete misappreciation of fact, complete misdirection in law. Do not mistake me, Balaji.
I didn't know.
Now, whoever did it, and I say this boldly because Delhi High Court has said it so. Therefore, I can say it.
One thing, Rajathan is criticizing his note. Judges note.
Yeah, I don't want to go there. Judgment is wrong, absolutely wrong. Okay, doesn't matter. You can write wrong judgments also. As you write good judgments, you can write bad judgments also. It's permissible. So, but that's not the point. The point is, you amend the law under the Income Tax Act to bring a transaction which is otherwise not taxable under the treaty. That's the point. Now, the global thinking process, global commentaries, OECD commentaries, all say there is one principle called good interpretation practice. If you do that, you can't do treaty over. That is why this multilateral instruments, why when G20 found out they want equalization levy, they could have said each country can amend the law. They have not said that. They said we go for an MI. So you can't do treaty over. And today, all these young children, whenever you fight time, you must read the judgment of Justice Goda Raghuram in Sanofi. That is the judgment in the country on treaty over. Every other judgment has taken a leaf only from out of it. It has covered across the world. Every best possible commentary is found. So you can't do. So what is the answer today? Even if you get taxed under the amendment, you cannot be taxed under the treaty. But countries which are not governed by treaty, this amendment will have a force.
So in that case, even secondary adjustment, I can take benefit in Article 9.
In which scenario?
I'm talking about the secondary adjustment, the transfer price.
Correct.
So Article 9 to many of the OECD UN treaties does not talk about
Okay. You are saying, oh, that's a good guidance. So he's saying, secondary adjustment is there in the Act,
Correct.
but not in the treaty. Good. Because OECD says it's recommending it, but unless you put it in your treaty, why should you do the secondary amendment? Good. I didn't know that. Thanks.
There one point on the equalization levy, where you are contemplating about the aspect doctrine. My inference of the equalization levy is, if you look what equalization levy as defined under 166 of the Finance Act, the equalization levy is a tax. And then if you go to definition, it says taxes or any other terms not defined, go to the Income Tax Act. So equalization levy is a tax. Tax is defined in 240. So therefore, I can treat it as an income tax and take the double tax avoidance agreement as well.
That's one rule.
Is it a good interpretation?
Now,
That's my point.
if you take it as an income tax, the easiest way out is you can always say I'm governed by a treaty which does not permit. Now, the whole idea of to defeat you from taking the point is the circuitous route. See, if they bring it as part of the transaction levy as part of income tax, it gets short out because treaty doesn't permit.
Correct. They don't want me to take advantage of treaty. That's why they brought it.
So, the long and short of it is they have to pick and choose. Either way, they will lose. If they say it is income tax, treaty doesn't permit. If they say it is some other tax, then they can't sustain it. What other tax should we tell? What is the aspect? What is the aspect?
Income produced.
Therefore, it is an income tax.
China and all that,
You got my point. Either way, they will have to lose.
China and all that, the Samsung and all that, the Apple's contribution, they want some levy on that because you are earning more profit.
Whatever it is, if you are protected by treaty, you may lose, keep on losing till tribunal. Some high courts may also approve the tribunal, but most of the high courts are, except whereas on every high court, every tribe, there are only two disturbing judgments on treaty. One is Verizon, and Verizon is followed in Vodafone South by the Bangalore tribunal. But for these two odd judgments, every judgment is an assessee's favor.
What is the other one?
Vodafone South.
For a news case.
And unfortunately, I have both the judgments, both the cases.
That's right, very good.
Desert Shiksha has thrown out it.
Is KP Verghese still relevant or not? To all the deeming reverse gifts.
You might-
Is it
No.
relevant or not?
Now we must deem KP Verghese as dead. I hope Sam will approve.
Maybe what he says, if the particular receipt is not income, it cannot be treated as income even for avoidance of taxes. That is
No, that is all you fight with the court and succeed. I don't have to give you reasons. Even if you are a man without income, I don't have to disclose and I can still lodge inquiry. What prohibits? I don't have to take superior's consent. I don't have to give you disclose. If I don't like you, I will bring you under 132. It's simple. I don't like your shirt, I can bring you under 132.
As regards bail, as regards bail, no information can be disclosed, even for courts also.
In fact, recently we filed for 7 years in Karnataka High Court, we filed a writ petition. Very simple. It's a time barring assessment on 31st December. Okay, the man could not complete it. He gets an approval within 20 minutes and says he got it 24 hours before or 24 days before, puts up and says, I am now initiating special auditor. Just to beat the limitation. Okay? All right. Give me the questions. What is that special reference? Please give us the reference. Please book into their accounts whether this is a corporate income or not under section so. Some 10 legal questions, including shunning one of the Karnataka High Court judgment as wrong also. Whether it is right or not. Reference. So I moved a writ petition. I told the court and fair market value. One question was fair, which there's a separate mechanism. So I asked the court, he can outsource accounting business to an accountant to understand because it's a complicated process. He can't outsource his own quasi-judicial functions to a chartered accountant. 10 questions.
Already done through 4480.
Yeah, these 10 questions, these 10 questions is simply also, he wants the chartered accountant to come and sit in his chair, sit in his seat, and then he will only sign the ink the order. This is simply to beat time. Immediately stick. So you have such types of proceedings happening. How can you say you need not do these things?
44 MB.
It'll lead to a jungle raj, and we are going to experience it. Anyhow, good days for all of us in the process.
One thing about it is, 45 MB is any mistake, not time is very big. But when the matter came to the constitution by the Bila takeover and Kishore appeared, he says, Kalyanathan Under Secretary filed an appeal. This report is made binding on the Astin on it. In this scenario, the Karnataka can be limited, the auditor can be put.
The latest amendment, I found it only to be 10,000 rupees. I don't know what is the implication of it. Whether will you lose his certificate? Huh?
Yeah,
They can validate.
You can discard.
Huh?
No, but the report is not binding on the department or RC. The constitution, the report is not binding.
Yeah, when I read the provision, my first worry was not 10,000 rupees. That somebody will cut a check and give. Implication is whether we lose the certificate of practice.
Who will give the 10,000 rupees? Company or as a auditor?
No, even auditor will bill it again. That's not a, it's a pass-through cost. That's not a big issue. The problem implication is when you lose COP. That that's the interface which is right. But they have put the clause, keep it there, reasonable cost. See, yeah.
Ravi is not
There
here.
will not be any more charter.
Yeah. See, there is a case for reasonable. It says every penalty under the Income Tax Act, before they frame the law, they frame the provision of reasonable cost, and then frame the law of penalty. And once there is a case for reasonable cost, then discretion. Therefore, it can't be said to be unconstitutional or ultra-virus. Especially, they will all quote, starting from Satyam, they will put all the cases. This is the content, and then based on which we are trying to do. So it's all social objective legislations.
Right, reasons cannot be given. Even the courts cannot be given.
No. Yeah, but see, even if you put court, that's exactly Chandrakumar's case. You can't exclude judicial review through a provisions of the act because it's a basic doctrine under the constitution. How can you exclude a constitutional right through a provision? You can't do that.
Nation tax code also.
Suppression of dissent. Suppression of voice, suppression of dissent.
Okay.
Exactly the point we are raising, Constitution versus Income Tax Act. As some law lord said, income tax is a tax on income. Now you have so many deeming provisions, but such deeming, unfortunately, in capital gains it says species of income. That's a very unfortunate decision. Now that has given a handle to the department to deem so many things which has nothing to do with income, but Constitution can certainly come when you question it, saying that it's not a tax on income.
100%. 100%.
That's a point I would like, that every case of deeming, for example, now 40A tax deducted, fails to be deducted, you have got enough authority in law, you have to pay the tax yourself along with interest. But why should you disallow the payment itself? That's a deemed income, which has nothing to do with income at all. But we failed in Madras High Court.
Oh, yeah.
The question is mainly Constitution. That's why I was very anxious to hear you, because you are talking about Constitution and income tax.
I will try to answer. When you tell children, SAD is raising a very important point. All of you listen to the question. That's important, more than the answer. Because the question has wisdom more than the answer. If you read deeming fiction is permissible in tax act. You can deem a cow as buffalo, no problem. Both are animals in common sense. SAD is saying, even deeming fictions have limitations. And non-income, something which does not fall within the ambit of income in its common juris sense, can you deem it as an income? Is it constitutionally? Now I'll answer it in two parts. 6 types of commercial transaction were falling short of the requirement of sale. If you see Gannon Dunkerley works contract, A.V. Meriyappan transfer right to use, Northern India Caterers for supply of food, then society, then controlled price, then hire purchase, Sundaram Finance. 6 judgments said 6 categories of transactions do not meet with the ingredients of sale. What are the ingredients of sale? Contract, intention to transfer, consideration, and identification of the goods for transfer. There is no absolute divestiture of ownership and investor, therefore these 6 transactions will not be sale. Now, constitution gets amended, that's the point which is raised here. So, 366(29) capital A, they brought the provision in the constitution. Clause A to clause F. These 6 transactions shall be deemed to be sale under the constitution. 2 points. Under normal definition, they are not sale. So, constitution deems a non-sale fictionally as sale. This is borrowed in the respective sales tax enactments later. So, Star's question is, when constitution doesn't deem a tedious withholding as income, and a non-failure to withhold doesn't become income in its common jurist sense, can you deem it as an income under a statute? You cannot do it. That is the difference between a deeming fiction in sale. What is, yes, you must have the mandate under the constitution. When GST was defined, in fact, Mr. K. Paraskan spoke this in the parliament. Because our seniors, he spoke him that morning before he addressed the members. He said that like agricultural income is defined in the constitution, you need a definition. Otherwise, you are going to have trouble, even in the GST scenario. Today, you can't do it for a non-income as a deemed, because it is deemed under the income tax. You have judgments, no doubt, but you can always contest it. I mean, it's a view which we express based on a fundamental.
So for us, 40A1A and 40A3, it is only disallowance of expenditure. It's not a question of deeming income.
No, expenditure
So only
is
expenditure.
But it becomes income, no?
No.
Expenditure is being disallowed.
As my friend says, there is no deeming of income. Most sections, what he said, the expenditure will not be allowed. It may result in something being taxed as income.
No, we'll make this jump. We'll take one step at a time.
Income includes loss.
So 100 rupees is disallowed. Now, you get a right to tax on it because it is disallowed. Now, what form and character under the Income Tax Act, what form and character it has to take then? And now, deny me an exemption.
1 minute, sir.
Yeah.
You get 1,000 rupees income, right? That 1,000 is only what is taxed. Out of that, you get 900 rupees as an expenditure, which is allowed out of that 1,000. Net 100 is taxed. By this deeming selection, out of that 900 something is removed.
So he says, you make a mistake and therefore I will disallow your expense.
Yes. So what is always taxed is that first 1,000 which you have received.
Because we are working on a net basis.
Yes.
Domestic receipts are on net basis.
While taxation is on net basis, what is taxed is first 1,000,
Yeah.
and the rest gets deducted.
So,
this
I
may
mean-
not be the right provision.
Yeah, but whichever, see, can you do it? Yeah, can you do it? This could be the answer under the constitution. If it is an income, that way we work. Good. I learned something today. Each one of you.